Hello, my name is Mark Wade, and welcome to Blue Marble Photography. Hope you're on your way on your photographic journey, learning things, practicing things, trying new things. Always try new things. That's part of what I want to encourage everybody to do. Today we're going to cover a couple of things. One in this video, and then another that is associated with it in another video. And that is light management. And this is something that every good photographer practices and learns through trial and error, or it doesn't matter if you go to school and somebody tells you exactly what to do. You still have to try it with your own camera, whatever the environment may be. You still have to try it. That's why I always thought it was strange when people want to see what your settings are for, when you make a photograph. Not because, I get it, you may have the same photograph and you want to do the same kind of thing, but lighting conditions change so drastically all the time, even when we're using artificial light, that it becomes a thing where whatever the moment demands, that's what you do. That's what you're learning. Putting your settings at the same exact thing that somebody else does may not even work for what you're trying to do. So learn what you need to do in order to make what you want to make. Now, first and foremost, what I want to talk about in light management to start with is filters. Now, a lot of people don't want to use filters. They don't think that, especially photographers, they don't want to put not all, okay, a lot of people do use filters, but other people think it's a bad idea to put glass in front of the expensive glass that you've paid for, because that glass, that you paid for in your lens has coatings and everything that alleviates, chromatic aberrations, and just, it has dispersions and all these things. It will flatten things up, it'll straighten things up, it'll correct barrel distortion, all these things. And then we put a cheap piece of glass in front of that. And so, to a lot of people, that you're destroying the value of what it could be. Now, I get that. And I might agree to a certain degree that you may lose some detail if you put cheap glass in front of it. Believe me, I've had some I bought a neutral density filter recently, and it might have been a polarizer, I don't remember. I do remember that I just got it because I wanted it to protect the front of the glass. That's all I got it for, the front of the lens glass. I put it on there and I used it, and I seemed to be doing okay. And then after a couple of rounds, I finally got into editing, and I found that that piece of glass was garbage. And I paid $40 for it, so what do I expect, I guess. But there is some truth to that, is what I'm saying. So if you're going to get some filters, if you want more detail, you may want to buy the better ones. And just look into the descriptions and especially the reviews. If there's 90% really good reviews of it, it's probably a good piece of glass. If there's a one-off or somebody got a bad piece or something, you might want to just, take the chance. It's up to you. Okay, so what do I want to talk about filters for? Well, let's in light management, what kind of things can we do to manage light? Well, when I'm talking about filters, in this sense, about all you can do is lessen the amount of light coming in. Now, I get it, there are speed boosters and that kind of thing. That's another discussion, and we'll get into that at some point. But right now, I'm talking about slowing your camera down. So what is available for slowing your camera down? So there are several options, and you need to look those up yourself. I'm not going to bring in a bunch of gear and show them to you. They're very easy to use, and they're very easy to figure out. Okay, it's just a matter of trial and error. If you can't figure it out, just do some stuff and see if it works or not. One type of of a light reduction filter that I've used. I started in the beginning was a graduated filter, and basically what a graduated filter is you have, it's for shooting skies, right? Because cameras are garbage and they can't get the contrast or whatever, and you have some nice clouds over there, and cameras are just junk, right? They can't get it right. Let's think about that. A camera can't shoot it right. Now, there are some options nowadays with video especially, where you can get 15 stops, right? 15 stops of dynamic range. Well, that's maybe for video, and maybe you can try it with your photography. I don't know, maybe that'll work. But for the most part, if you're pointing at a cloud reflecting the sun, and you have shadow areas at the bottom of your landscape shot, you're going to blow it out before you do it. So a lot of people, they fix it by making multiple shots, right? And then they blend them all together, and that way everything's in focus. You know, kind of like the old Group 64 kind of mantra. That's fine, nothing wrong with that. Do that. I've tried it a few times. I didn't like it because my focus breathing just didn't work for me. It doesn't mean I'm never going to try it again. I think it's a good method to think about. But I like using filters, and there are some issues with filters. Now, the graduated filter is dark on top and blank at the bottom, so that your clouds will be, the light value, the strength of that light will be reduced. So there you go, you're managing light. You have to think about these things because your cameras are junk. They can't get it right. You can't tell it, I want it to do this or that, and then it gets it just the way you see it. You have to get it so that everything's washed out maybe, and then you try to bring it all back in post. They're junk. That's my opinion. And if there's one thing I'd like to see camera companies do, it would be to get it right for once. You know, figure out you get the brightest point of light, and you get that right, and then you get the shadow, and you get that right. It seemed like smart pixels would be the way to go, but that's just the way it is. So you're going to use this graduated filter to do a static shot like that. Okay. Now, there's another type of filter. It's called a polarizing filter. Now, a polarizing filter is really good to use because it starts by reducing light, but when you point it in a certain direction, and it has to be 90 degrees from the sun, and this is what you do, right? If the sun is over there, if the sun is in that direction, this is where you want to point it so that everything will be darkened. And what is it? How is it darkened? Well, what a polarizer does is it doesn't just darken it; it removes glare. Okay, it's a condition of light that's reflecting off vapor. It's reflecting off whatever, and you see this done very well when there's a body of still water, and you want to get what's underneath the water, but there's all this glare on the water. Well, if the sun's over there, right, you know that you're 90 degrees from the angle of the sun, you can point it at that water with a polarizer, and you'll get it done. You'll get the bottom of that. You'll see underneath the water. Now, think about it. What if you're making this shot and you want to get the true color? That's what polarizers do. They get rid of the glare. They give you true color. That's what the actual color looks like. And I get it. People don't want to use them, but think about it. You're going after true colors. You're going after all these true things. Now, again, if you're going to buy a polarizer and you get junk and you get blurry photographs or whatever, you're going to get what you pay for. But there are better ones out there that work very well. There are times when you can, in black and white, you can blacken out, you can make the daylight sky into black. That's how great polarizers can be, but they are only good at certain times. Like I say, 90 degrees from the sun. Point at it. Okay, where can I point this thing? Well, the sun's that way. Well, I can point it this way. So it's important to understand that, and you'll be able to tell if you buy a polarizer, you put it on your camera, and you start looking around and turning it to see the effect. You'll figure it out pretty quickly. Okay, so that's a second filter you can use to manage light. The glare light. Now there's another filter, which is it's a neutral density filter. Now I don't claim to understand neutral density filters because for several different reasons. Neutral density means I don't know. All I know is it darkens the whole frame. Okay, so and what the manufacturers tell you is that you get more details in the sky. Well, that doesn't make any sense to me because all you're doing is basically you're readjusting your exposure. As soon as you put a neutral density filter on there, your exposure changes because you make a global application to everything, including the shadows. So maybe they work in a way that I just don't understand. If you understand, let me know in the comments why it is that once you put a neutral density filter on, it's any different than just changing your exposure. But let me tell you what neutral density filters are good for. Whether they're the kind you slide into a frame, or whether they're the type you just screw onto your to the front of your lens. And there are variable neutral density filters as well. And let me tell you what those do. Those will give you a variable density, right? That's what that means. Well, why is that important? Well, let's say you're out and about and you're making photographs and you want a longer exposure, but at the same time, you don't want a bunch of things in detail. So what do you want to do? Well, you want to make a 2.8 shot or a 1.8 shot. Well, you're going to have a hard time if it's bright outside getting that to be a long exposure. So what do? Well, you get a really dark neutral density filter on there. And the variable ones, they go really dark, 10 stops. And you turn that thing till it's almost, you can't see anything. Now you can get your long exposure. Well, why would I want a long exposure? That's in the next video. Long exposures, movement within your frame. We need to think about this. Having movement in your frame is not necessarily a bad thing. And in fact, it could be something you want to pursue to make things look different. Think about it. You've probably seen, I'm sure you've seen photographs of a waterfall with a long exposure. So it just looks like this dreamy looking cloud almost. And maybe you have splashes coming up that came up that you can see that are these little details like that. That's somebody who put their camera on a tripod in front, and maybe in the middle of the day, set their camera down, or maybe handheld if they're brave, and and they know how to hold it like a tripod, and they made their photograph of that waterfall with a longer exposure to make it look like a dream. So that's something in our heads. We have to get it in there because it's a possibility. It's a possibility for a lot of the photography that we do. Obviously, if we're making, again, I keep saying this, but that's the truth. You don't want to make a long exposure necessarily with a portrait, although there are ways to do that, and we'll talk about that another time. It has to do with front or rear curtain and a flash and all this stuff. And those are fun things to do. So those are the basic filters that will darken down your overall exposure and allow you for a longer exposure to create motion, blur, movement, and all kinds of things for you to think about because it's an option. And if you don't consider all your options, how can you think for 1 second that that's what the photograph that you want? Until I realize all the things I can do with my camera, how do I know what I want to even make? Because a lot of times the problem is we don't know how to do something, so when we think about what it would take to make a photograph, we just put it out of our minds because I don't even want to think about doing that. I've had people tell me that. Well, I've made talks before at camera groups, and people tell me, I just never even thought that I would ever want to do anything like that. So they don't think they want to do anything like that because, number one, they want to keep it simple, but number two, they've never tried it. If they practice it, they may think twice about it. Think about the photographs of a car racing by, and everything's blurred out except the car, right? The tires obviously are going to be a little bit blurry because they're moving, but the car itself is static. The body is static, moving through a scene. Somebody thought about what it meant to go, a 1/4 of a second or 1/8 of a second of that car and pan it nice and even. Now, that's not easy, but if you can do that and get the focus right on the car, everything behind it will be blurry. And now you've created motion within your photograph. That type of photograph is far and away more dynamic, much more engaging than a static photograph at 1/3000th of a second, freezing all the action, in my opinion. Now, I'm just talking about that. Now, that doesn't apply to everything because some things don't look good when they're moving because their arms are moving or people's arms are moving and it just looks silly to me. So I want you to think about that. Light management. Now in the next video, I'm going to go through some things that have to do with intentional camera movement. Okay? This has a lot more to do with a longer exposure, setting your shutter speed open for 1/8 of a second, 1/2 a second, or longer. I want you to think about this. I'm going to give you this last little tip. Think about what it means to have a 1-minute exposure and your camera is moving. What do you think will happen? What do you think will happen? Check out the next video and you'll find out. Thank you. See you later.